I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about the Julian Assange case. 175 years in prison. The U.S. is throwing 17 more counts of these Espionage Act, under the Espionage Act. 17 counts. 175 years. Alexander, what do you make of this latest development in the Assange case?
Well, to quote a friend of ours who's used these words in another context, shocking but not surprising. I mean, a lot of people have suspected that Assange is going to go down, that the US is going to go down the route of the Espionage Act in prosecuting Assange. And many people thought that the conspiracy case that they brought against him before was basically a stalking horse case. In other words, it was intended to soften the ground before the real case, which is this one, suddenly appeared on the scene. The one thing I'm going to say is, before we get into the details of the case, it's quite interesting that this case was brought now. And I think a lot of people thought that because Assange had a reasonable prospect of resisting extradition from the UK on a case involving the Espionage Act, that was why the US originally brought the previous case on the conspiracy charge, conspiring with Chelsea Manning, Bradley Manning as she was then, to use this password to extract information from a Defense Department computer without it being revealed that it was in fact Manning who was actually taking out that information from the computer. That was a very simple, cut and dried conspiracy case. And I think there was some uncertainty then whether anything more would follow. And the big question is, why has the US gone for the much more serious case under the Espionage Act now? And I think there's two reasons. Firstly, I think they may have been advised by people in Britain that the facts in this conspiracy case were not very strong. And I think the other thing is that they may also have been advised that a extradition request under the Espionage Act is likely to be granted. So I think this is really bad news for Julian Assange, that they felt able to bring this case now. And it suggests that the US is very confident that they will get Julian Assange to the US.
Why is the UK going to grant that extradition?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't know that they are.
Well, why do you think that it's very likely that they'll grant it?
I think that they will probably look at this and say that there is clearly a case here under US law, that assurances have been given that he will not face the death penalty, and that in light of that, they have no real grounds to defend an extradition request on an issue of US law under the Espionage Act, and his major defense being the First Amendment of the Constitution, which we'll discuss in a moment. I think the courts and the British authorities will say that this is a case which has to be defended in the United States on a question of US law, doesn't concern Britain, and on that basis we will extradite him.
Will Trump press May for the extradition when he sees her?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt at all. There have been lots of telephone calls going backwards and forwards between London and Washington over this case for some months now, before, in fact, Assange was brought out of the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy. So I think this has been carefully worked out and planned. I don't think it's cut and dried, because there's always, in extradition cases, it always has to go before a judge in Britain. And judges are unpredictable people. But I think overall there is an agreed strategy by the British and the US authorities as to how to go ahead with this case. And I'm sorry to say this, I think 90% it's certain he will end up in the United States.
Now, he's got a lot of trials already ongoing, as well as he's serving 50 weeks in a UK prison. And then he's got Sweden, which is also pressing to extradite him. Out of all these cases that are surrounding Assange, which one takes precedent?
Oh, I don't think there's any question at all. It will be the US case that will take precedent. Firstly, the case that keeps him in detention for 25 weeks with a possibility that it may be 50 weeks, the case that was made in Britain, I think that was done, we've discussed this before, in order to keep him in detention whilst the extradition request from the US is processed. I mean, that will take about a year. And that's why they're keeping him in detention, in order to keep him in detention for that year until that extradition request is decided. Now, the Swedish case, it's important to say at the moment that the Swedes have not formally asked the British to hand Assange over. They've just started proceedings in Sweden to issue an arrest warrant, which would then have to be converted into an extradition request. I think the US will be telling both the Swedes and the British, please don't take this seriously. It is to the US that he must go, because that's where the real case against him is.
All right, let's get to the case. The First Amendment. This is what could be radically changed.
Yes.
Should the DOJ move ahead with this case, and should they potentially win? I mean, we're looking at a massive change in the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the entire fabric of the U.S.
Absolutely. Let's look very closely at what the First Amendment says. The First Amendment says that Congress shall not pass any law which abridges the freedom of the press, or the freedom of expression, or the right to protest grievances. Now, that has always been interpreted in the United States as meaning that the press, the media, will not be interfered with by the US government or by Congress, and has freedom to express its views, including to publish classified information provided to it by whistleblowers. Now, I have to say, this has never actually been tested fully in a US court. The closest it came to, the case everybody refers to, is the Daniel Ellsberg case, which took place back in 1971, which is remembered as the Pentagon Papers case. Now, in that case, Daniel Ellsberg was a Department of Defense official. He leaked to the New York Times a massive research document that had been carried out within the Pentagon, which looked at the origins of the Vietnam War. And the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense sought proceedings to stop the New York Times publishing that information. And the Supreme Court of the United States said that it would not be, they could not be, the New York Times could not be.
Was it the Times or the Post?
It was the New York Times.
It was the New York Times.
It was not the Washington Post.
Okay.
It was the New York Times. It's very important to say that because people always muddle the two. The Washington Post gets all the credit for the Watergate case, but it was the New York Times that was involved in the Pentagon Papers case. So the Supreme Court of the United States said that the U.S. government could not prevent the New York Times publishing the Pentagon Papers material. The Supreme Court of the United States did not say that the New York Times could not be prosecuted if it published classified material. That's an important distinction. So that point was never tested. What it said was that it could not be prevented from publishing classified material. Prosecution comes after publication. Now, what then happened was that the Department of Justice decided, after the material had been published, after the Pentagon Papers had been published, not to prosecute the New York Times. And it became accepted law in the United States, but never tested law, that the First Amendment protected the newspapers and the media from publishing classified material, even though that was not quite what the Supreme Court of the United States actually said. Now, what is going to happen is that we're going to have a case which will certainly go all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, in which that is going to be tested. And if the government wins, at that point, the first protection right that the media thought it had will have gone, and any newspaper or television station or journalist who publishes any classified material faces possible prosecution under the Espionage Act without the protection of the First Amendment.
All right. And so that would explain why the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of the mainstream media was absolutely ecstatic when they arrested Assange. They hate Assange. They have openly admitted that they believe Assange was working with the Russian government, that he has committed treason. The list goes on and on and on. And now finally, last week, you saw Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, all these guys that for years upon years were hating on Assange. All of a sudden now, they're actually starting to take the side of Assange. And not because they're fond of Assange or they like him, but because they finally realized what's going to happen.
Exactly. My own view about this.
They're to blame for this.
Alex, they have
Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, CNN, MSNBC. If the First Amendment goes, they are to blame for this.
Absolutely, completely, and entirely. They should have protected. They should have defended.
There you go.
Julian Assange from the very first
beginning.
The very moment it appeared that the US government was out to get him, and I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about 2009, 2010, they should have rallied to his cause. They should have also, by the way, rallied to Manning's cause also. Instead, they spent the last 10 years monstering him, smearing him, behaving as if these Swedish allegations, which frankly, I mean, the timing of those allegations should itself have been suspicious. They should have defended him throughout all of this. Instead, they smeared him. And I have to say, when I saw what Rachel Maddow, who I have, particular cause, like I think all of us do, to feel real contempt for, when I saw Rachel Maddow coming out and defending Assange, I said to myself, well, you have partly built the scaffold upon which he will hang, and upon which you and the rest of the media will hang. Because if this prosecution succeeds, investigative journalism is dead in the United States.
Yeah, it's you get so furious with everything that they did.
Absolutely.
For the last, 8-9 years to Assange. And now all of a sudden, now that this could boomerang and this could get them, now they're starting to talk.
Can I say something?
Everyone should hold them to account. Everyone should hold Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Chris Cuomo, all these guys to account for what they've done.
Indeed. And I would add, by the way, the British media also. Because, of course, the other thing about this is that, of course, the US is now making it very clear that it will enforce the Espionage Act against foreign journalists working abroad. Julian Assange published the Manning material whilst he was in Britain, and he is not a US citizen. So if a newspaper like, say, The Guardian publishes classified material provided to it by a whistleblower from the United States, then it too can be prosecuted under the Espionage Act.
Yeah, Julian.
That's the implications of this.
That's the implication. Yeah.
And can I just say something? You talked about all these people who should have defended Assange and didn't. One of the things that made my stomach turn was that I was reading earlier today a long article in The Guardian by Alan Rusbridger, who was the editor of The Guardian, who republished all of Julian Assange's work, because Julian Assange cooperated with the mainstream media to get things that he obtained published. He still smears Assange. He says that he's a difficult man and untrustworthy. I think the suggestion that he was untrustworthy, coming from The Guardian, by the way, particularly makes me sick, given the books that the Guardian has written about Assange, Luke Harding and company have written about Assange, and the fact that it was The Guardian that published the information about a password that could have been used to break into WikiLeaks' data. Anyway, I don't want to go into the details of that, but the point was, Rusbridger, in that article, finally says nothing about the Swedish rape allegations, and finally admits to how dangerous this case the US government is bringing is for the media in Britain as well. And as you absolutely rightly say, Alex, now that it is they themselves that are facing the consequences of this thing, they finally realize how important it is to defend Julian Assange, even though for the last 10 years they have been monstering him, they have been smearing him, and they have been cheering on every step and every step that has been taken against him. Even when he was removed from the Ecuadorian embassy, they were ridiculing
all the
him.
way up until then. They were ridiculing him.
The way up until then. And he's been locked up in Belmarsh prison. He's been denied proper access to his lawyers. He's hardly seen visitors. He's managed to see Pamela Anderson managed to see him. But they said nothing. And now suddenly, that as I said, it's coming close to them. Suddenly they've discovered that this is how dangerous this is for them. Well, I will fight for Julian Assange, and I will fight for the freedom of the media. If it means, as I said, that The Guardian and The Times and MSNBC and all the rest are protected that way, I will still fight for it, because it's something I believe in. I don't think these people believe in it. At least they've not believed in it when it mattered. Only now, when it affects them, do they believe in it.
There you go. Now that it affects them, they believe in it. Absolutely. And the whole thing was all because, in my opinion, was all because they saw that Julian Assange had integrity. He was a real journalist. WikiLeaks was doing real journalism, and people like Maddow and Chris Hayes and Chris Cuomo, all these guys that sold their soul to the corporate media establishment so that they could promote wars, they could promote globalists, elites, suffering, killing, propaganda. They saw in Julian Assange, what they lost. What they lost many, many years ago so they can get that big paycheck. And they piled on him. And now it's going to come back and it's going to get them. And the irony of it all is that it's going to get them, and it's coming from the man that they hate the most, which is Donald Trump and Donald Trump's DOJ. And I'm not happy about that either. Why is Trump, who during his campaign talked very highly about WikiLeaks and praised WikiLeaks, let's not forget that. He praised WikiLeaks and Assange. Why is his DOJ going after Assange so aggressively?
I'm going to give two reasons for this, because firstly, I think first of all, there is a lot of pressure from the U.S. intelligence community, because obviously Assange and the Pentagon, because obviously Assange published material which showed the kind of things they have done. But I think in Donald Trump's case, he has a personal motive. And it's got nothing to do with Assange himself. I think it's got to do with the media, because in the first few months that he was president and during the transition period, he was the target of abusive leaking by members of the US deep state and by former members of the Obama administration, indeed current members of the Obama administration, because it was still the administration during the transition period. And this is the way Donald Trump criminalizes all that activity. He can then come along, if he gets his conviction of Julian Assange, if the DOJ gets a conviction of Julian Assange, he can then come along and say to the New York Times and to the Washington Post, some of these leaks, and the one I particularly have in mind is the leaks that brought down Michael Flynn, his first national security advisor. Some of those leaks were leaks of classified material. I now have a judgment which says that was a crime. It was a crime of whoever leaked it to leak it. It was a crime of you to publish it. I am now coming after you. And that, I think, I'm absolutely sure is what Donald Trump is thinking. It is his way of going after New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and all the rest of them. As I said, everybody who follows the Duran knows how I feel about those leaks. I think they were appalling and outrageous leaks. But there is a higher principle here of the freedom of the press, and I will defend it. I don't think Donald Trump has those feelings, and I understand why.
Yeah, okay, I see where you're coming from, but doesn't that work against Trump in that if he really follows this line of thinking, then he becomes that tyrant that they have been, screaming about for the last 2.5 years, where he isn't. My opinion on Trump is, everyone has different opinions about Trump. He's definitely not a tyrant. He's definitely not a dictator. He's not a white supremacist, not all those things. No. But if he does follow this line and he does manage to get a conviction of Assange, then he has pretty much handed to the media what they have been screaming about for the past 2.5 years.
That may be true, or it may very well be, because of course he's as I've said many times, a very skillful politician. He can say to the media, look, what you did before was wrong. You're not going to do the same thing to me again come the 2020 election.
Right.
Because if you do, then I have this decision, and I will come down on you like a ton of bricks. And I think that will chill them, by the way. But I'm going to say something else.
But the precedent is awful, though. What about the guy after Trump?
Well, what about the guy? Well, that's why I oppose it. But can I just finish with Donald Trump?
Yeah.
I have to say that if I was Donald Trump and I had been put through what he was put through during those early months of his administration and during the transition period, I would be a very, very angry man. And angry people often make unwise decisions, and this may be one of them. So, let's not forget that. As we've said before, Donald Trump is an emotional man, and it may be that on this issue, emotion is driving him, and anger is driving him, and frankly, some hatred also, because, again, if I was Donald Trump, which I'm not, I could very well understand why he might hate the New York Times and the Washington Post. But anyway, it would be a calamitous precedent. It would be open to extraordinary misuse by future administrations. It would be the end, as I said, of investigative journalism in the United States. You could not have got the Pentagon Papers. You could not have got so many other things that we have learned from whistleblowers from the US for so long. It would be an awful thing. It would be a massive step towards the United States becoming an authoritarian society.
And the worst thing about it, Alexander, is that the other part, taking the media outside of it, the deep state went after Trump very, very hard.
Oh, yeah.
And he should be equally pissed off at the deep state. But in this scenario, you give the deep state exactly what they want. Is they come out the big winner because they come out with unprecedented power.
Indeed. And can I just
Past
say,
the
I
Donald
think
Trump years, going,
absolutely
8, 10, 20 years into the future.
yes. And I'm going to tell you who must be advising him of this. There's one person who I am sure is telling this to Donald Trump, and that is Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani has made it very clear, not now that the case was brought, but before, that he thought that any prosecution of Assange under the Espionage Act would be a mistake. So he's Donald Trump's personal lawyer, and I'm sure that he is now telling Donald Trump this. What you're doing may hit the media badly, but it is empowering the very same forces that set out to destroy you.
Exactly. That's well put. Exactly. You're empowering the forces that really pushed hard to destroy his presidency.
Yes, because the media in perpetrating the Russiagate hoax was, to be absolutely clear about this, an indispensable accomplice, but it was only an accomplice.
They were tools. They were tools and shills.
They were tools. They were tools and shills. Yeah. The principals were others. They were the members of the intelligence community, the deep state, and members of the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Yeah, it's just incredible what's happening. Alexander, to wrap it up, let's take a giant leap forward. The extradition happens. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Looking at the makeup of the Supreme Court right now, if you had to take a guess, do you think that Assange's chances of winning the case are next to nothing? 50-50, no. Good? How would you?
No, I think that it's 55 to 45 in Assange's favour, actually. I know there are some very conservative people on the Supreme Court. Conservative in this context means being conservative about the protections provided by the First Amendment of the Constitution. I think most of them will decide this thing in Assange's favour. That's my guess. I would not stake anything on that guess.
Yeah, we're looking way forward.
Exactly.
In the future,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I followed Kavanaugh's decisions, and I know that a lot of people think that Kavanaugh is somebody who always sides with the government. I don't think he would on this one. I think there are a lot of others who would. The only one who I feel probably, I'm certain in my mind, would probably support the U.S. government, the Justice Department, in this prosecution is Clarence Thomas. But about the others, I am not sure. And though, as I said, I wouldn't want to guess on it, and I wouldn't want to stake Julian Assange's future on this, and certainly not the freedom of the press on this. I think on balance, this Supreme Court will find in his favour. I'm not sure. And as I said, I wouldn't want to stake anything on that guess.
Well, he's got a very long and painful road ahead. That's for
sure. And I hope that if he does find himself in the US, which I predict he will, that all of these people who are now supporting him or saying they support him will continue to do so, and that he will continue to get the support of organisations like the American Civil Liberties Union, which have behaved in an appalling way throughout all of this. And I hope that they will continue to understand that in fighting this complex case, he's fighting the case in the end for them too. They behaved treacherously and appallingly towards him, but he will still need their support, and he will need money, because fighting in a case in the Supreme Court of the United States on these very difficult and complicated legal arguments is going to need some brilliant lawyers. They do exist in the United States. They will not do their work for free.
Yeah, well put, Alexander. Assange is fighting for all of these people.
Yeah.
Even the people that put him in this situation to begin with.
Absolutely. Even for the Rachel Maddows and the Cuomos and the Hayeses and all these awful people.
Yeah, well put. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much, guys. If you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on that notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop. Pick up a t-shirt like the one that I am wearing, but not like the one that Alexander is not wearing today.
Well,
Alexander
indeed.
is
I
dressed
can't wear
much,
it
much
today.
nicer than I am. But Alexander, this shirt
No, it's
feels
not. I'm not
great.
dressed nice. I'm not dressed nicer, and I wish I was wearing the other one, but it needs time. It needs to be laundered.
Well, you got some more shirts on the way.
I've got some more shirts on the way. So once I've got those,
You got
will
the gray.
see me.
You got the gray polo with the
Absolutely.
black eagle crest.
Indeed.
You have the what else? The long sleeve.
Indeed, absolutely, and the one I've got, and more coming. So I will be a man of many shirts of many colours.
And I think you also have a mug that's
indeed,
golden.
indeed. I don't know where it's gone, but anyway, but I do absolutely. So you will see me in all these resplendent clothes, all of them of A1 quality, 100% cotton, really comfortable, beautifully fitting. Really, really classy clothes to wear.
Yeah, they do have a nice fit to them, that's for sure. All right, guys, donate to us also on PayPal and on Patreon. We also have a Subscribe Star as well. The link is in the description box down below, so you can donate to us on Subscribe Star as well. You can also follow us on Instagram, the Duran_com. And don't forget, download the Blank Chat app to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. Go to theduran.com and see all the articles that Alexander is looking up to every day. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody. Take care.